Bonjour et bienvenue à ce nouveau webinaire organisé dans le cadre de l'initiative pour la finance durable de Finance Montréal, la grappe financière du Québec. Je me présente, je suis Florian Roule, directeur principal stratégie et partenariat, responsable finance durable chez Finance Montréal. Chaque mois, notre organisation, avec la collaboration de nos partenaires, organisons des événements en ligne, webinaires, ateliers, pour permettre à la communauté québécoise de se rencontrer et d'échanger sur des thèmes d'actualité et faire progresser ensemble la place de la finance durable au Québec. Ce webinaire, aujourd'hui, vous est proposé en collaboration avec le groupe SASB FSA du Québec. Au cours de la prochaine heure, nous parlerons de l'accréditation FSA qui vise à approfondir la collaboration et la compréhension entre les facteurs environnementaux, sociaux, de gouvernance, le fameux acronyme ESG, et la performance financière des entreprises. Cette compréhension est d'autant plus importante compte tenu des considérations croissantes envers la durabilité qui ont des implications directes financières majeures pour les entreprises et les investisseurs ainsi que pour la résilience de notre économie. Aujourd'hui, en compagnie de nos conférenciers, vous découvrirez comment l'accréditation FSA peut être un moyen de poursuivre votre formation en durabilité et acquérir un avantage concurrentiel sur le marché du travail. Vous découvrirez également comment les professionnels appliquent la comptabilité de durabilité de nombreuses manières, et ce, dans différents secteurs d'activité économique. Tout au long du webinaire, vous aurez l'opportunité d'interagir, de poser des questions avec nos conférenciers via la fonction Q&A de Zoom en bas de votre écran. Celles-ci seront traitées un peu plus tard dans le webinaire. Permettez-moi de vous présenter dès à présent nos différents conférenciers. Tout d'abord, Stéphanie Berger. Bonjour Stéphanie. Stéphanie est gestionnaire principale responsabilité d'entreprise et environnement chez Bell Canada. Stéphanie a obtenu un baccalauréat en géographie à l'université Queen's et a passé près d'une décennie à New York, Londres et Paris pour faciliter les IPO et les dépôts de conformité avant de retourner faire son MBA à McGill. Au cours de son MBA, Stéphanie s'est spécialisée dans le marketing et la responsabilité d'entreprise et a dirigé une équipe de recherche pour le livre d'affaires de Christine Arena paru en 2007 sur la durabilité d'entreprise. Stéphanie est titulaire de la certification FSA. Notre deuxième conférencier est Pasquale Posteraro. Bonjour Pasquale. Pasquale s'est joint à Desjardins Gestion Internationale d'actifs en janvier 2019 en tant que gestionnaire de portefeuille et compte plus de 15 années d'expérience dans le secteur des placements. Avant cela, Pasquale a occupé le poste d'analyste en investissement chez McKinsey Placement. Son rôle consistait à apporter un soutien en recherche au fonds américain McKinsey ainsi qu'au fonds Summa SRI Investors qui a pour mandat les aspects ESG. Pasquale est détenteur d'un baccalauréat en administration des affaires de HEC Montréal et également détenteur du titre CFA. Pasquale est aussi titulaire de la certification FSA. Enfin, notre modérateur de ce webinaire sera Addas. Bonjour Amer. Amer est professeur et directeur du Van Berkom Investment Management Program et du Van Berkom Small Cap Case Competition à la John Molson Business School de l'Université Concordia. Il dirige également le Sustainable Investing Practicum en collaboration avec Manuvi et est membre du programme de certification professionnelle en investissement durable de l'Université Concordia. Amer a par ailleurs enseigné dans les universités McGill, Queen's et Sherbrooke. Amer a obtenu son MBA de l'Université du Michigan et est également détenteur d'un baccalauréat en mécanique de l'Université américaine du Caire. Voici donc nos conférenciers pour la prochaine heure. Amer, à toi la parole.
Merci Florian. It's a pleasure to be here with everybody. We're holding this webinar in English to talk about the fundamentals of SASB FSA credential. So I'm here, and both Stephanie and Pasquale are here to represent the group, which is the Quebec SASB FSA credential group. It's an informal group, a number of us from academia, from the corporate side, from the corporate world, from the investment world, and we work together to try to spread awareness of SASB in general, and in this case, the FSA credential in particular. So what we want to talk about today on this very normal day where nothing special is happening in the world. I'm sure you all share that. We'll talk a bit about SASB. I don't want to spend too much time on it because it's information that anyone can attain, but we want to highlight the importance of SASB and how big a role it's increasingly playing in the world of sustainable investing and sustainability. And then we'll talk about what is the FSA credential specifically, the 2 levels there, and some highlights from the curriculum, the process by which you can get the certification, and just some administrative details. So just to start off quickly talking about SASB, well, we all know and have followed, I'm sure, the growth of sustainable investing over the last few years and the acceleration in that growth in particular over the last couple of years. And so one of the biggest challenges within the industry is to find a common language, right? So that everybody would report as investors integrate those ESG factors, environmental, social, and governance factors into their analysis and decision-making process. They need essentially decision useful information, decision useful data. And this decision useful data needs to be standardized so that they can compare across industries and across companies. And essentially, that's what SASB provides. And just in case anybody was unsure about how important this is, the CFA Institute is unequivocal in stating that consideration of relevant and material ESG information and risks is consistent with the fiduciary duty of an asset manager and is required for investment professionals who adhere to CFA standards of professional conduct. So it's unequivocal and clear. Any CFA charter holder is duty bound to take ESG factors into consideration. And the reason is they are material, they matter, right? So if you look at the catalyst driving the growth in ESG from this report by PwC, essentially investors are driven by the belief that those long-term sustainability or ESG considerations are important and they have real and quantifiable financial impacts, right? So you have on the one hand a lot of major regulatory overhaul, in particular in Europe, increasingly in China. We're seeing that starting to happen in Canada as well, and of course, depending on the ultimate outcome of last night's election, we'll see how things developed in the United States. Second important reason is the outperformance of ESG investing that's increasingly been proven through evidence. Increasing investor demand, as we saw in the chart back here from the signatories of the PRI, which have now exceeded $100 trillion of assets under management. It's 100 trillion and are more than 3,000 signatories from around the world. Essentially, as any institutional investor today in the world cannot really operate without being a signatory of the Principles for Responsible Investing. So that's increasing investor demand. The fourth reason is what we see as this fundamental societal shift, magnified by, of course, the current environmental, social, and health crises that we see around the world, from climate emergency, social inequality, magnified by the health crisis, of course, which is the pandemic. And so all this leads to the increased conviction that financial performance is increasingly linked with sustainability performance. And that's why SASB is so important, and it plays such a critical role. It's been around since 2011, released its final set of standards in 2018. Objective is to help businesses around the world identify, manage, and report on sustainability topics that matter most to their investors. And the final release in 2018 covers all the industries, and the way that they classify them is a bit different. I'll talk about that in a second. And the objective is this is something created for the market by the market, right? So it's not by regulators, it's not by governments. It's essentially created by practitioners and companies. And that's the key, is to connect those two sides, right? The reporting companies to the investors that need the information. So you need financially material information. SASB focuses heavily on materiality, and we'll see that in a second. But providing decision useful information, cost effective, you can download the standards, the SASB Materiality Map and standards for free. Industry specific, of course, because different industries face different types of ESG risks. Evidence-based, so that you can lend credentials and lend support to the different materiality factors, and of course, market informed. So essentially, it's a reporting standard for each industry. Like I said, available and free for companies to download and use. And of course, it is voluntary. Increasingly, we are seeing regulation, but for now, the disclosure standards are voluntary, right? So we're seeing regulation and changes in the European Union that require reporting on certain ESG factors, but the standards, the SASB standards are voluntary. So they divide sectors, companies into 11 sectors, and that's 77 industries. And of course, there are specific factors for each industry that investors have to look at and that companies have to report on. So if we look at how this is conveyed, it's through this materiality map, right? So the idea is that you look at each industry / sector along those 5 dimensions of ESG, right? So you have the environmental, social capital, human capital, business model innovation, and missing from the chart at the bottom is governance. And essentially, it takes those 5 categories of ESG and breaks it down into specific factors, ESG factors, like, as we see here, greenhouse gas emissions, energy management, etc., for each of the 5 categories. And then you go along the horizontal line to see the sectors. And if you click on any one of these, of course, if you are on the live website, if you click on any of those columns, it's going to expand. So what's key to understanding materiality map is that it's both a sector level map and an industry level map. So if you click, it's going to expand, as I mentioned. And the sector level map is color coded. So if it's bold, it means that the issue, that particular ESG factor, is likely to be material for more than half of the industries in the sector. If it's less heavily in bold, it means it's likely to be material for less than half. And if it's just white, then unfilled, means it's not material at all. Once you expand this chart and you look at the industry level map, you have 2 levels of color. Either it's bold or it's not. If it's bold, it means it's likely a material issue for companies in the industry. Of course, because within each sector, there are different industries. And you'll notice that SASB has its own classification system, which is called Sustainable Industry Classification System. So lumps together industries that are related to each other within the same sector and related to each other on the ESG spectrum. Okay, so it's a bit different than the classic GICS or Global Industry Classification System that we are all familiar with. So moving on to the credential itself, this is a great way to really learn about understanding SASB standards and materiality map and how to apply them, both from the corporate perspective and from the investor perspective. So it's a professional credential that will teach you how sustainability information can be financially material and what you can do with that information, right? So you would earn it's self-study. You read the study guide, sample questions, review the exam day guidelines. They have exams scheduled throughout the year, and do it online, proctored online, of course. And there are 2 levels, so level 1 and 2. And once you pass, then you have to renew your membership annually. Level 1 is designed to talk about principles and emerging practices. Ultimate objective, of course, is to understand which sustainability factors are material and impact corporate value. So in level 1, you learn about how those factors affect financial performance, the legal context, and gaining a common language to describe materiality of sustainability information to finance, legal, and accounting professionals. In level 2, it's more applied. So you learn, it's learning about how industry-specific sustainability information can inform corporate strategies or investor recommendations. And you would gain the skills needed to evaluate corporate performance on sustainability factors. It's not as daunting as the CFA for those of you that may have taken or considered taking CFA and are disturbed by the low pass rates. That's not the case here. This is very achievable, 85% pass rates for level 1 and 75% for level 2. And it's something that is attractive to people with different credentials and degrees as well, including CFA, CPA, MBA, or JD. The top 3 test taker job roles, just so you can get a sense, it's actually on both sides of either investor and corporate, right? So the top 3 are investors, consultants, and corporate sustainability professionals. And we have 2 of those here today, Pasquale from Desjardins as an investor and Stephanie from Bell on the corporate sustainability professional side. So it's really something that is valuable for a variety of professionals. What resources do you get? You get the handbook, candidate handbook, study guide, including learning objectives, an exam prep provider as well, and sample questions. All this is available to download. Now, in order to take the exam, you have 2 options. I do not believe there's a local test center in Montreal. I may be wrong. I'll ask maybe Stephanie or Pasquale to verify. And you can do it online with remote proctoring. In terms of the exam format, it's 2 hours, multiple choice for both. And if you look at the schedule, it's basically scheduled throughout the year, not every month, but it's scheduled in 6 out of the 12 months every year. And once you pass level 1, you have 2 years to complete the level 2 exam. In terms of assessing how much time it requires, about 25 hours of study for each level. And the cost is $400 US if you are a member of the SASB Alliance. SASB Alliance membership costs, well, for me, I think it's because I get the academic discount, so it's $200 US a year. And I believe it's 400 otherwise if you're a corporate professional. And then the level 2, similarly, it's 500 if you're a SASB Alliance member and 650 if you're not. And of course, this is all in US dollars. So what are the benefits? And this is what we'll get into in a minute when we open up the panel discussion with Pasquale and Stephanie. First, you learn the common language for working with legal, finance, accounting, investing, and sustainability professionals. Improve your ability to recognize the limited set of sustainability issues that drive a company's performance and value. Build confidence in articulating how sustainability is relevant to your company or the companies you analyze. Make more informed investing decisions as impact investing goes mainstream, and focus time and resources on sustainability factors that truly matter. So it's really unique in that it brings together the rigor of finance and accounting to sustainability while pointing the way to embedding material sustainability information into mainstream investing and corporate management practices. This is backed widely by investors in a survey this year. 81% thought that SASB that they recommend SASB for companies to use as a reporting standard, and 77% recommended TCFD, which is heavily complementary to SASB, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. CFA Institute similarly backs and recommends SASB, as do major financial institutions globally. And these are just some of the testimonials from Montreal-based professionals, both on the investor side, on the consulting side, and on the corporate side. It's something that they've all found extremely useful. So I think we'll move on to the panel discussion here with Stephanie and Pasquale. These are the links, by the way, if you want to learn more or download the candidate handbook, and we'll be sharing the slides after the presentation, so you can have a chance to look at them. So Pasquale and Stephanie, I want to start with you, Steph. Why is this important? What does it do for you?
I had to unmute myself, sorry. That was a great introduction. Thanks for that. It reminded me of a couple things too. So gosh, how long do I have? What does it do for me? I don't want to steal time from Pasquale, but I guess what I would want people to know about doing this as a sustainability professional in a corporation, especially in a matrix corporation like Bell with over 50,000 employees, is that, the nature of preparing these voluntary disclosures on sustainability is really cross-functional, and that doesn't exist in the financial side, or at least it doesn't anymore because it's just so mature. So for us, there are so many silos to break and so many people to get involved. And as you mentioned, so many different languages to speak. So I need to be able to tell the legal team X with their lingo, and the finance team Y, and the executives Z or Z, depending on which country you're listening from. And so having gone through the FSA, it kind of put everything into perspective for me, like who to say what to, and thereby help build the buy-in at the different levels of the organization. And it also helped me help others in the organization to help me create our financial our links to our financial report and our sustainability report by giving me the instruction, the how to, the methodology of what to report, how to report it. And then of course, how to read the SASB standards themselves and how to interpret the stuff. And it's literally like handing you the how to report these, material factors, on a silver platter. It's such a gift compared to other types of standards that are out there. And a really big gift is that the materiality is already baked in. So you don't have to spend all this time and money and human capital trying to amass, what is material. And for anyone out there who's done a materiality for a sustainability report, you know exactly what I mean. It can be totally exhausting. And we don't have unlimited funds in sustainability like they do in the financial areas. We can't spend $150,000 or even $50,000 doing materiality exercises every few years. So that's sort of like the higher level stuff, but it also helped me to explain to my team, my people, and the executives directly above me why certain things are material and sort of what the impact of the fact that the investors are demanding this information has on our company's overall performance. And so we get to be on indices like FTSE for Good, Ethibel, and things like that, which demonstrate our sustainability performance, but not just sustainability performance. It's overall performance. And I guess it helped me to explain internally how. Not I guess, this is for sure, because this is really the focus of my job right now. It helps me to explain to the executives how the sustainability part really latches on to the corporate strategy part and how they're mutually beneficial, but in particular, how this links to corporate strategic risk management, because a lot of this stuff is about taking risk out of people's portfolios, right? Investors want to invest in stuff that's more sure, especially institutional investors, which invest a larger proportion in our stock because we're a blue chip stock. So being able to make that case, being able to graft onto the corporate strategy that sort of sustainability lens was really helpful. And I got that through the FSA, because the FSA goes through and it helps you to explain things. What does it mean for X factor? What does it mean for Y factor? Why is it important? Why is it material? And then, of course, the gravy is the outcome. What we all get when it's said and done, when it's reported. And since what gets measured, as we know, gets done, especially in a matrix organization where everyone is being, graded on a particular set of objectives, and that sort of cascades upward. You can't say that. You can't say cascades upward. It scaffolds up. I just invented something there. Anyway, so having the backing of the FSA training made it possible for me to make the case for continued disclosure. So making it improve every year, which means our performance is being watched and measured, and therefore it improves, and that keeps BCE on these indices, and it keeps our rankings high with other organizations like Sustainalytics and hopefully with people like Pasquale. I think I covered the sort of the spectrum. I mean, I'm hoping that those statements are going to generate some discussion around, what does it mean for my job and stuff like that. But there's my sort of like brain dump.
Yeah, that's perfect. We'll come back to more specific questions. Let me move on to Pasquale, since you created this great segue, Stephanie. So what's the value for you from investor side, Pasquale?
So basically, and thank you, Amber, for doing this presentation. So why SASB? When you look at just ESG, there's a lot of different consortium, and it could get really confusing. You know, from the PRI, SASB, GRI, it's very cumbersome for especially some of these corporates. A lot of them are cumbersome for them to actually go and actually assess the materiality. And like Stephanie said, what's really interesting about SASB is that the materiality map is already into the process. So it makes it a lot easier. So to give the perspective as a portfolio manager and analyst, what really attracted me to the SASB is really when you start looking at the disclosures and really comparing the different sectors, it makes it easier for us to start comparing companies apples to apples instead of apple to oranges, because the disclosure are very specific to that industry or that subsector. So it makes it a lot easier for us to assess and start to model out. And because when you look at the number of disclosure, which is around 77, you take that 80% of those disclosure are actually quantitative. So once we start building out, and companies like BCE, which by the way was one of the first one to embark on SASB, so I want to commend BCE for that. It really, we need more of these companies to follow suit, because it's going to make it a lot easier. And as we populate this data going forward, we'll be able to actually start comparing apples to apples on a company, and really on a quantitative measure. So that's really the aspect that really attracted me from SASB. And also the disclosure itself, it's really what could be material from a financial and non-financial aspect. So again, it's assessing the risk and how you could integrate it into a model, and then you could actually help. If you build a DCF, your WACC is a company more risky on what they're disclosing or not, and then you could use your WACC and really adjust your different assumption going forward. So it's really that aspect of really of getting SASB on board, and really their disclosure is really focusing, because it's not just from a shareholder perspective, but like Amber mentioned at the beginning, it's really the stakeholders. So it was really trying to get the consortium to get really what will impact. I mean, it's not 100% perfect. I mean, I think it's going in the right direction. And I think there's, you know, even from a corporate side, there's some adjustment that needs to be done. And then it's up to the corporate to actually have a discussion with SASB. But I think it's, in a nutshell, it's going in the right direction. And I think this, like accounting was 50, 60 years ago, because of the lack of standardization within the ESG, I think SASB is really trying to go that route. And I think SASB is really going to try to become the standard going forward. And this is why also SASB is trying to integrate like GRI and other entities to really try to focus and funnel what could be material on for those companies.
So we'll come back to the efforts at standardization in a minute. Let me ask you, Stephanie, first. You alluded to how it affects your job. So let me ask you, how do you build buy-in internally for adoption of SASB?
I'm trying to think of how to state it very succinctly. The first thing I do is I figure out what matters to who I'm talking to. So, you know, if it's just sort of the reporting side, the answer is, you know, there's already a baked in materiality, an argument for why, and the indicators are there, and they will make it more easy, or they will make it easier for people to compare us to our competitors, which is good for us because we do perform well. So we should report based on this because of those factors. But also then I have to get the permission of people who are responsible for the data in those factors. So for example, greenhouse gases. Why should they report them the way SASB says to report them? And the answer is, to them, well, it makes your job easy because you don't have to figure it out. This is how it is. But also there is consistency built into SASB, which is they're not trying to reinvent the wheel. So if GHGs are already being calculated, according to GRI or the GHG protocol in one way, they're trying to build on that. They're trying to not make it harder. So you have to be able to speak the language. You have to know, of course, what the CDP is and the GHG protocol and learn those, the acronyms and the lingo of that person. But what's really interesting is how do you get the buy-in from your investor relations group to be able to talk about it? And that's where a lot of what was new to me in the FSA material that centered around the links to the particular clauses at the SEC and their documentation, that really helped, because then they sort of clued into the legitimacy behind it. This is not just another framework to use for reporting. This is grounded in what's already out there. It's based on already existing things. Even, the name FASB and SASB are intricately connected, which makes it a little easier to sell. But everybody has their own sort of what's in it for me, what are the risks associated to this disclosure. And I have to say, in all transparency, we don't respond to all of the indicators asked for by SASB. As Pasquale mentioned, 50 years ago, it was a little bit messier in the financial world and things weren't as defined as they are now. We don't have the benefit of that amount of time. Although everything is accelerated in our 24/7, 365 world, SASB is in a field where things are changing all the time. And to their credit, they involve us corporates in the reanalysis of their standards, because not everything, even though what might be wanted by investors, makes sense to disclose. Some information is far too competitive to disclose. It just wouldn't be put out there. Some of it's far too risky to disclose because it could incur sort of interpretations from an uneducated group about what the information may mean when it doesn't mean that. So there are still work, as Pasquale said, to be done, but having that flexibility and the involvement of the standard makers with the corporates makes it easier to sell it also.
Right. So Pasquale, you mentioned earlier, about having SASB versus other forms of reporting. So I guess a couple of questions there. One is related to what kind of reporting you're seeing right now, because SASB originally really started in its early years focusing on the US and recently has made a concerted effort to be more appealing on a global scale. So are you seeing more reporting still on the US side versus, for example, Canadian corporates?
You actually saw a bit of an acceleration on the US side versus Canadian companies. I mean, obviously completely different markets, but the effort is also in Canada. You're starting to see some companies other than BC starting to implement. And what makes it hard is that a lot of these companies are trying to figure out which one is really important. So some of them, you'll have SASB, you'll have GRI, but you're seeing it's accelerating as well, and not just in the US, but Europe markets are also and emerging markets are actually adopting it at a slower pace, but it's coming along too. So they're really showing an effort on that front. So it's really at the beginning. So it's really to get, and it's also my job to, when I have these discussions with companies, to show them the value that's added within a SASB framework. And it's fine that they do the GRI, but it really shows, I try to, it's a question of educating as well. So it's up to me to tell the companies, if you go this route and it's a question of transparency, it helps. So I think you saw a rapid growth on the US side, like Walmart is actually doing it now, which 2 years ago, you wouldn't have anything from Walmart. So they're really doing it. General Motors is actually doing SASB as well. So it's really picking up on the US side. You're starting to see a real effort for companies to really integrate this into their platform, because if I start thinking longer term, again, from a risk profile, the companies that will be the first adopter is really going to play from a capital standpoint and a risk profile. It's going to help them going forward. I mean, this is what I envision. So the ones that will adopt and start disclosing some information, it's going to bode well going forward. So you're seeing a rapid pace from companies, not just in the US, but across the world.
Okay, fantastic. So we have a couple of questions already from the audience, so I'll pass them on to you, and then maybe we'll come back to there's one main question I want to ask both of you regarding standardization. First, there was a question on whether this is the kind of training that your employer or somebody's employer is likely to fund.
I could start. So definitely at Desjardins, we embraced it, and we're going that route, and it's something that we take seriously, and it's actually something that is actually part of our one of our goals, and it is funded by us.
For my part, I can't see why an organization wouldn't fund it. It's useful education. It's directly related to someone who's in corporate reporting's job, and that's usually the criteria upon which they make these decisions. I took it too early to have had it be legitimately done. I was one of the first 200 in the world to be certified or credentialized. So I paid for it by myself, but it's totally doable anyway. It's not exorbitant by any means.
It's not daunting. Yeah.
And it's so beneficial to have as a professional on your resume, because it's like, you know, way back when computers were the brand new in thing, if you knew how to use a computer, people wanted to know what you had to say. So it's helpful from that standpoint, no matter what. And
that's really a key point, Stephanie, that you made there, is that it gives you, it's a signal to potential employers that you have this knowledge, right? And so there is a question also, from the audience on why should university students consider taking FSA. I'll say, in my view, and I'll let you two comment, but the obvious reason is if you're entering the job market today, and especially now in this, post-COVID world where it's even more important to try to distinguish yourself. You're sending a signal to the market that you have this knowledge already, and obviously this is one of the fastest areas of growth in terms of hiring, and whether on the corporate or sustainable or investor side.
And I'll add to that is if we're in a hiring process and I have two different curriculum CVs, and one actually is doing it, or a candidate versus somebody who's not, it's actually going to pick more of my interest of why he's doing it. To me, it's a checkbox for me. So definitely it's something that I look when people are actually taking it, and if I see it in their CV, to me it's a plus.
I'd like to add that even internally for credentialism, it works because there's more appetite for anything that's attached to ESG right now, whether it's the C-suite or lower level executives. So if if they're hearing ESG, there's also a good chance that they're hearing or seeing in whatever news flashes they're getting, SASB this or SASB that. So if I come to them and I've got that, then my legitimacy for the subject has already skipped a level. That's very helpful for internal sort of expertise.
And does somebody have to be studying in sustainability or finance to take the FSA? No, there's no.
I could start. No, absolutely at all. There's not. It's very. It's not as in-depth like a CFA, like you mentioned, Armor. You have really more of a qualitative and knowing how SASB and what are the impacts. And then the level 2 really gets into the nitty-gritty of analyzing and really what do you do with that data? Do you need to normalize it? Do you need to, and there's no complicated calculation as well. So it's really open for everybody who has an interest, and it really opens you the view from an investment perspective and what companies need to do from again, what could impact them from a financial and non-financial impact if they disclose that information.
Right.
Yeah, I totally agree. If you're university educated, you kind of understand things like normalization of data anyway, because everyone has to take statistics in university, right? So, if you're at that level of education, this is really going to be just here's why it makes sense, and here's how you can talk internally to sell it. And by the way, if you're going to use it, here's how to use it. It's so good. It's so well done. It's like having your hand held all the way through. It's such a gift.
You're very passionate about SASB, Stephanie.
I'm very grateful for SASB.
Yeah, that's a really well put. So there's a question. Well, I guess there's a question about whether you can learn this in school or university. As far as I know, I'm not aware of this being offered as a sort of a standalone course, or it is self-study. I don't know if SASB has collaborated with universities to kind of offer in-person delivery of this. Are any of you aware of that?
Oh, I don't think they have.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessary, honestly. If you click on that link and you go through the handbook and the material covered, it does not require someone to, I mean, like Stephanie said earlier, right? It holds your hand, or already it's designed to be self-study. You don't need someone like me to come and kind of regurgitate what's there and walk you through it. It's so easy to absorb and process.
Yeah, I would say that universities use it in their courses as a way for students to evaluate corporate reports. Like they'll say, use the GRI principles or use SASB, but they're not really teaching you. You're not getting the content of the FSA. They're just applying the standards. Yeah. It's not the same thing.
Yeah, I in my sustainable investing courses, I always refer to the SASB Materiality Map, and I explain how it works, and I use it as examples. I go through an example for specific companies, but yeah, it's not the FSA credential per se is not directly covered. So I have a bit more of a technical question regarding industry-specific issues and to what level of detail they are covered under the SASB standards.
Can I take that one first?
Sure.
So that's what's so great about this, because of the 6 classifications, SICS. I can go to the standard that applies to my industry or industries, right? So BCE is telecom and media, and it tells me what the items are that are already material. So it's exactly that. It is specific details for industries. And I think we covered that already. It's 77 industries and 11 sectors. I mean, when I say it tells me why a subject is, why do I need to report on GHGs? It tells me this is why it's material to your organization. I don't mean material in the GRI sense where somebody wants to know about it. It's material to the financial performance of the firm. It creates value for the firm for these reasons.
Yeah, and that's what's so useful for an investor to it does the job for you basically. Yeah.
Basically, because then you're able to, again, like I mentioned, you're able to compare apples to apples. It makes it a lot easier once you have that data in front of you.
Yeah.
So I would echo what Stephanie just said.
So there's also a question to you specifically, Pasquale, on how important it is to incorporate qualitative factors into financial models, and maybe how difficult it is as well.
Yeah, so the qualitative aspect is always a bit more gray, but what's interesting about SASB is that it layers on to that quantitative disclosure that it comes. So it comes and help you to really go more deep into the analysis. Okay, so there's that data. Depending what that data is, then the qualitative comes actually in second, because sometimes also the data for certain industry, it's a lot more, it's harder. So the qualitative comes in and give you a second layer to that research you're doing or on the company. So it's beneficial. It's sure that it stays, it's a lot more gray. So it's really important for the one who's doing the analysis to really ask themselves the question and have that conversation with the company to really drive the company to see what exactly you're looking for. And again, it becomes a dialogue between you and the company. So SASB is really trying, not holding your hand, but really trying to guide you to where it really is material, and that layer of qualitative that comes and just fortify your quantitative data, it bodes well.
Yeah, it kind of gives context.
Absolutely.
To the quantitative data points, because you can say, well, we have X number of incidents for Y topic, but if you don't have any policies, which is a qualitative topic, if you don't have any management principles behind it, then all it means is you're throwing out data without having any sort of like operational rationale around it, which is, basically the way Warren Buffett's been investing his entire life, right? Like,
Absolutely.
is it a managerial issue? Are they paying attention to what matters for the success and the value creation and the risk management in this company?
Yeah.
And if you're not, then it doesn't matter what data you're throwing out. It doesn't have any, useful context, and therefore it's not decision useful.
Absolutely. And that's what I would add to that. It really, from the context perspective, if you have a company and you're starting to comparing year over year on that company, even from a GHG emission, you could have the G emission coming down, but then again, the qualitative disclosure, okay, so why did it come down? Is it because there was an M&A? Is it specific to the company? Is it where they're located in the world?
Yeah.
There's a lot of different layers that come into play. And again, this is why questioning and going into that disclosure makes you think, okay, yeah, the emission coming down, but maybe they closed some old industries or manufacturers that were really had a big carbon footprint. Okay, so is it really inefficient, or is it just the way of closing it, or is it a big turnaround from a company in 1 year that really made the GHG emission come down, and then they're just going to come back the following year? So the qualitative aspect of those disclosures come and make you think even more and have that discussion with the dialogue with the company.
I'd like to add something, Amber, if I can.
Sure.
There's this what I kind of like to call a strategically sneaky element about SASB, because these are, as we can all agree today, financially material topics, but it's really hard to get these topics into the financial documents. And so SASB, while they're suggesting, where you should put these things, and we should probably clarify that, SASB was born of the U.S. market structure, right? And filing at the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission in Washington, D.C. And so, what's material is, more of the U.S. Supreme Court definition of material, and that could change depending on where you are in the world. I don't know how France deals with it or whatever. Canada and the United States are very similar, but there's no prescription for filings with the SEC, so your annual report or your quarterly reports, to say anything about this stuff, even though it's important. And SASB gives you the tools to be able to talk to the same people, so people like Pasquale, with the same kind of legitimacy, but outside the financial reports. That's really helpful.
Right. And for companies that really are maybe also early on in their exploration of how to develop a sustainability strategy, it's very helpful because it tells you, okay, I'm in industry X, let's open SASB and see, okay, what do I need to start caring about, right? And then what do I need to strategically focus on?
Yeah, if you wanted to jumpstart your career as soon as you get through the door for a company that has no sustainability strategy and no reporting, start with SASB. Find the standard for that industry and just follow that, and you will be heads and shoulders above probably a lot of other reporters in your industry.
Right. So this is going to come back to kind of this idea of standardization. So we all agree that SASB is great. It's doing a fantastic job of putting out there what's material and what's important and so on. But we still are in a world where there is a lack of standards on this, right? And yes, in accounting we do have the U.S. system and the IFRS global system, right? And they coexist and so on. So I guess my question to you is, do you see this industry converging towards a single global standard where SASB and complementary to it, the TCFD, are one, and then you have on the other side a group that's led by or coordinated by the World Economic Forum, includes the big four accounting companies and some major investors behind it as well. And this effort was launched earlier this year in Davos in the annual meeting in Switzerland, and has been pushed forward as recently as August, coming up with an update that they're pushing forward with that. So what do you think, how do you think this is going to play out? Is it going to converge between all of them, or are those going to continue to coexist? Tough question, I know. Just
well,
I
mean, I can speak from my selfish corporate perspective, because all of that data has to come from somebody in the company, and someone has to coordinate that, and it's a lot of work. So selfishly, I'd like there to be a single standard, of course, because then I only have to do the work once. Right now, there's a real burden on corporate reporters to put this data out, and I I warn you, I mean, it's a huge burden. It's probably, 80% of my job. And I just don't think it needs to be. The question is, who could do it? And so, I mean, I think what we're going to is collaboration and convergence. Hopefully, Pasquale, you'll agree that this is also helpful. But you know what? It's so muddy right now, and we have so far to go. I'm not sure we're ready for a single standard, but I think that we're headed there. In the same way that, well, or maybe a couple, like in the world of financial stuff, we have a couple, leaders out there, and that's manageable for corporate reporters. That would be really helpful for us. That's what I'd like.
Yeah, same here. I mean, I'm hopeful that it goes that direction. And if you take accounting again, you have IFRS, you have GAAP, maybe you have a couple going forward, and I'll just say again, I totally agree with Stephanie. It's a big burden. And not only that, is that, again, big companies could afford it because they have the resource, they have the money. When you start trickling down to smaller companies, it gets a lot harder. So if you get to a standardization where one is a nonprofit organization and it's a lot easier and they don't take a side if it's corporate or investor, it's open to everyone. It was really thought out especially for that, to really try to get everybody on board. And I am hopeful or optimistic that it's going into that direction. I think there's still a lot of work to do, but I think they're in the right direction. And, maybe we have 2, 3, but the amount of information that's out there and, it's cumbersome. It's a lot of work. I've seen some of the, this is one of the complaints I get from the corporates. I mean, when they get these documents, I'm not talking about 100 pages. I'm talking about 300 pages and they need to answer. And if they don't answer, some of these companies won't just give them a negative score and don't even give the companies a chance to reply. So it's really cumbersome. And it needs to diverge to 1 or 2, because again, when we talk about ESG, it's a big topic. It's very open in the air. So we need to funnel it and make it a lot more concentrated. What really matters from a corporate side, from an investment side, from a stakeholder side. And I think they're really going to the right direction. So I'm hopeful at least 1 or 2 in 4 or 5 years from now.
Yeah, that seems to be where we're heading now. Those 2 groups that are kind of leading the way.
I'd like to dispel a myth that Pasquale is helping to promulgate out there, and that is that large corporate reporters have a lot of resources. This is true in financial data. They have so many systems and so many people and so many internal controls and governance things. In the sustainability side, we're not quite there yet, because it's unequal legitimacy. And so if you're, unequal legitimacy means different priority as well, and different priority means different kinds of funding. So, when I say I'm it, I have to go and dig under all the rocks and, for 50 people in the organization to dig out data, because we don't have the systems to back us up. So, I want what you're saying to be true, but it's not.
I know.
And we work really hard to get you the data that you need and that you want, because it's beneficial to all of us. It's just really hard to do.
Yeah,
would you say? No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to add, it just helped from a transparency point of view from the company, right? But it takes time. So I totally agree with you, Stephanie.
Yeah, we need to mature.
Yeah.
We need to mature as a type of reporting, and we will. It's coming. And this is a great time to be involved in all of this. I mean, all the changes are exciting, not in the same way the elections are exciting. Right now, I can't wait to check my news feed when we get off of this.
What happened in the last 50 minutes?
Yeah, seriously, did another one flip? But I think it's going to mature where, you can't unknow what you know. And I think that all of the corporate executives who've clued into this, and all of the investors like Pasquale and Desjardins who've clued into this, can't unknow how important and how significant this is for the overall health of an organization and how it creates value in an ongoing fashion. So we can only go forward. I can't wait to see who and who's going to be involved and where we're going to be and what kinds of documents are going to be, used to divulge this kind of stuff. But 10 years from now, it's going to be way easier to do this job.
For sure. But do you think we are maybe at or near an inflection point where corporate executives are now starting to look at this differently than they were, like say even a year or two ago.
Absolutely. And I think COVID helped that. I think the lens through which people are evaluating, investors especially are evaluating organizations, is really reflected in the standards, in the SASB standards. And the best way to understand the SASB standards and to use them is to do the FSA credential courses, because it really gives you the how to. The standard is, giving you the methodology on a silver platter, but the whole background on how to be a corporate actor internally to use those standards is in the FSA credential course.
Right.
I'm saying you need one and the other together.
Yeah.
The SASB is a gift, but the FSA really tells you how to use it as a strategic tool internally.
And not only that, it actually preps you up of asking the question to the corporates, and you're seeing more and more, like especially in 2020, from a COVID perspective, I'm getting a lot more discussion with the boards, not just the executive team. They want to learn, they want to embark, they want to try to understand. There's a lot more aspect to it. I'm not going to get into the details, but you see that the boards are really starting to pick it up, and really it's becoming a really big factor for them. So absolutely.
So there is also a question about whether this is kind of local, if I'm looking at the FSA credential and I plan to work elsewhere, not just Montreal, Canada, or in Canada, is it known, and how popular is it in other markets?
Well, it's not Montreal based, so.
I guess somebody is based here and they're asking whether this is popular globally as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You're seeing different societies really picking up. Boston, New York, on the West Coast. It's not just Canada or Montreal per se, or Toronto. It's really across in the US, also in Europe. So that it's becoming, I don't want to call it an international standard, but SASB is, although it was implemented for the US, a lot more people are using it that are not from the US as well, and implementing into their ESG analysis.
Well, it makes sense, right? Because
absolutely,
it's the only, even the TCFD doesn't tell you the how to. The TCFD is just a framework, and they want you to do it. They want you to prove that you've done a scenario analysis.
That's it.
But the prescription for a scenario analysis changes depending on what you're looking at and what industry you're in, and there's no prescription on that. SASB is relevant to any investor and anywhere in the world. They all care about the same things, more or less, right? The things that are going to impact your finances positively and negatively, because those things impact whether or not you're a going concern. And that's what SASB bases itself on. So I think it will become the sort of de facto base standard upon which other things might develop, or where the convergence comes to. My daughter is doing online school and she just told me I'm too loud. I'm clearly very passionate about this.
It's the new reality.
Yeah, and it's
going to be unavoidable, I think.
The reality is materiality is agnostic to geography, right? It's not like it's material somewhere and not material elsewhere, right?
Absolutely, because it has an impact, right? And when you start looking at some of these companies they're global companies, so it's applying the same standard not just for the US but across their entities and their assets. And one of the questions I ask sometimes is that if the regulation is not as strict in this entity, what do you do? Or do you apply the same standard, or do you don't? So it really does a great job on that perspective.
All right, well, we're coming up on 1 o'clock, so I want to thank you, Pasquale and Stephanie, for taking the time to answer those questions today. Hopefully we were able to provide some useful information for those that are interested in SASB and aspire to take the FSA credential. So thanks for your time.
My pleasure.
My pleasure, and thank you.
Thanks everyone for attending.